Hello and welcome to another video on classic World of Warcraft. Since BlizzCon 2017, we now know that we're going to be getting official classic WoW servers, and this has left a lot of people who wouldn't have normally thought about trying the vanilla experience on a private server wondering whether or not the classic experience is for them and if they should give it a try. Imagine you're one of these players who never played the vanilla back in the day and has never played a private server. You're logging in for the first time on the official classic servers. The very login screen will be very different from what you've been used to, and the class and race options available will be markedly different. Your experience with the class and spec you choose to play in vanilla will be unique and a far cry from how that character would play in live, current World of Warcraft. So what class should you choose when the time comes? How do you make that decision? In this video I'll go through some of the details, hopefully help you decide what to main when those classic servers go live and get you hyped for when that finally comes around. So the first thing to bear in mind with classic World of Warcraft is that a lot of options which you've grown used to now were simply not available. It's stating the obvious, but if you play a Draenei, Blood Elf, Worgen Goblin or god forbid a Pandaren, you'll have to pick something new. It doesn't stop there. A lot of the updated class race combinations of live WoW were only added with Cataclysm and later, so I'm sorry you won't be able to play a Tauren Shadow Priest. Yeah, I'm not sorry about that. It's surprising how few races there actually were in vanilla, just 4 per faction compared to the 7 options you have now, and with classes more restricted like Tauren and Nelf only druids, Alliance only paladins and Horde only shamans, you'll have a much narrower window to make your choice. So what about the actual gameplay? Well, what do you want out of your character? In WoW, specs and classes can be basically separated like this. You have melee and you have ranged, and you have tanks, healers and DPS, with some classes able to play multiple roles. This much makes sense in both the vanilla and current versions of World of Warcraft, however there was one quite apparent difference in the two versions of WoW which needs to be made clear. It goes without saying that any spec which is in the game can be played, but in vanilla some specs and classes were astronomically more viable than others in their chosen role. Balancing was simply not a thing back then, and you'll find it quite difficult to say get into Naxxramas 40 man as a feral druid tank or as an elemental shaman. With that said, let's take the melee ranged question to begin with, because it's quite an easy topic with vanilla. Do you want to play melee? Well, to put it simply, your two viable options are the warrior and the rogue. Back in vanilla, these two classes were essentially the only melee worth playing at endgame. Want to play a paladin? You'll be stuck using 2 abilities for most of your leveling experience, and you'll get outgunned by rogues and warriors from the get-go, if a group actually even takes you as anything other than holy. As for feral, yes, you can turn into a cat, and most players level like this for speed and efficiency, but at max level, druids made for reasonable healers, but their DPS output was laughable compared to the similarly geared rogue, which unfortunately shared a gearing pool for a lot of items. Bear in mind that you'll be raiding with 39 other people at endgame, and that some late game dungeons were 10 man. The amount of loot acquired per run was laughable when this large group size is taken into consideration, so the chances of your team wanting to gear up a feral druid when they have a whole host of greedy rogues waiting in the wings were unlikely, I'm afraid. So what about the enhancement shaman, you ask? Yeah, you could try doing some PvP. I'm sure you'd do fairly well with the versatility and the survivability of the shaman, but if you try going for a 10-minute plus long boss fight, you'll be out of mana and useless in about 10 seconds. So, what about the rogue and the warrior then? The rogue was bags of fun in vanilla, and that's why so many players had one. I don't have any stats for this, but I'm pretty sure they were the most played class in vanilla World of Warcraft. Not only were they one of the few classes which had something resembling an enjoyable rotation rather than just a couple of go-to abilities, but they crushed in both PvP and PvE. They were also playable by almost every race, and being the supreme melee DPSer were very popular with that brand of players. As for the warrior, now interestingly the warrior was perhaps the only true hybrid of classic WoW, in that both its tanking and DPSing potential was massive, particularly at the end of vanilla. I personally really enjoy the vanilla warrior playstyle, but I'll warn you now, if you want to go in as a pure DPS warrior, be prepared to be asked to tank a lot and turned down for groups because you only want to DPS, not tank. Warriors were the only viable tanks, which made them vitally sought after in that role. As DPS, not so much. Still, a perfectly good choice for somebody who wants to play a melee DPS, but doesn't mind being asked to tank, at least occasionally. Oh yeah, and don't forget that in every race in vanilla could play a warrior, so options. Now we get onto the ranged classes, and the same applies as before. Certain specs and indeed classes were simply not picked for ranged DPS spots in groups, primarily due to their poor damage output or lack of mana efficiency. Mages, hunters and warlocks were the prime choice for players wanting to play both ranged and DPS rather than heal. Elemental Shaman suffered the same low damage and mana problems faced by the subpar melee classes, and Shadow Priests just weren't a thing given how vital Priest healers were in Classic WoW, and because their damage was again subpar compared to their other ranged counterparts. I should say now, however, that if you want to PvP as a Shadow Priest, go ahead. I've heard that like the Enhancement Shaman, it's both a fun and viable option, so that's a plus. Just bear in mind that if you also want to raid, dual specking was not a thing in vanilla, so give up all hope or have a hell of a lot of gold on your person if you want to heal and kill stuff in PvP. Right, moving on to the viable range DPS classes then. Up first we have the king of it all. Yes, I'm talking about the mage. Mage players in current WoW will be happy to know that your class was just as much of a deadly glass cannon as ever in vanilla, and indeed it surpassed most other classes in the game by actually having 2 viable talent trees. Yes, you heard it, Blizzard made a class with 2 viable specs. Unbelievable. But yeah, seriously, go Frost at first, it will help leveling and you'll not go as fast. Mages? Simple. Don't go Arcane and you'll be fine in vanilla, and again, you have a host of races to choose from. What about Hunters? The most played class in the game today was actually more fun in some ways in vanilla in my opinion. Firstly, you know those pets which make players first choose to play the class in the first place? In vanilla, you actually had to do stuff with them to make them fight for you. You had to feed them based on a diet, you have to train their abilities and so on. Ammo, it was actually a thing, you needed to buy it, and the best quality ammo at that, which you housed in a quiver or ammo pouch, which was itself an item, which you could buy different versions of. And yes, it was visible on your back. Why Blizzard removed the cosmetic aspect of this feature, I'll never know, but it was there in vanilla. You also could use pretty much every weapon under the sun, giving rise to the hunter loot joke. But unlike now, you equipped both ranged and melee weapons at the same time, switching between them depending on what abilities you used and whether you were in ranged or melee distance. All of this might sound like quite a bit of admin for current hunters, many of which play without a pet ammo or melee weapon equipped. You'd be right, and yet I think it added a level of immersion in keeping with the RPG flavour of the classic game. Hopefully you'll agree. As for the specs, marksmanship had the best output, and whilst you could mix and match certain talents from all trees, like with every vanilla class, MM would be the way to go for those wanting to get the first choice for raid spots. Now I come on to the Warlock. What is there to say about this class in vanilla? Great aesthetics, great class quests, a badass persona and unique minions including a sweet class mount. But the Warlock was pretty odd for a vanilla class. Others know far more than I, for I haven't touched the thing, but talent trees were messed up, and the vital curses you brought to play in a PvE encounter meant that most Warlocks were tasked with little more than managing the curse and or dots they were assigned, and having enough soul shards to provide the myriad benefits of the items and spells you needed them for. A lot of hard work and dedication went into playing a Warlock in vanilla. They were very likely the least played class in the game, but they were there, so if that's your thing, go for it. So I've discussed melee and ranged DPS, so let's go over tanking and healing. I've already made it clear that warriors were considered the only truly viable tanks. Now I'm sure that certain unviable DPS spec combinations may and will be tried by certain players who are really determined to break the mold in Classic WoW, but I seriously doubt that this will be the case with tanking. I can't see any group gearing up a prop paladin with gear that could have gone to one of their tanking warriors, and as for being a feral tank, you might get an off-tank spot possibly at some point, but it's doubtful, and if you consider how geared you'll be expected to be as you make your way up that tanking ladder, and how unlikely it is that groups will want you to tank even in dungeons, I wouldn't hold out hope. One other thing that's important to bear in mind is that sets that you get will have tier bonuses, and they weren't specific to whatever spec you were playing. Each class had a tier set for that tier. So Paladins had a set regardless of what spec you were in, Warriors had a set regardless of what spec you were in, and these set bonuses reflect the roles that Blizzard intended for those classes. So if you look at the Paladin tier set bonuses, if you look at the Shaman tier set bonuses, the Druid ones, etc., you will see that they are geared for healing, not for tanking and not for DPS. And that's another reason why it's highly unlikely that you will get a spot at endgame doing a role other than the one that the class was essentially designed for at the time. So what about healers then? Priests, Shamans, Paladins and Druids were all dedicated healing classes, and in the cases of the Paladins and Shamans, provided unique mechanics which changed the way in which Horde and Alliance raid teams operated. Starting with the Priest, there isn't too much to say other than that Holy was the way to go, and that they were solid throughout Classic WoW as a healing class as iconic as the Priest should be. Your position as a dominant healer will give you sway in group decisions and in the dreaded Loot Council, but be warned, healing will be all you'll be doing for most of your WoW experience outside of PvP. The Druid was arguably the least viable class in vanilla. Its healing and versatility were outmatched by the other three healers. It couldn't tank compared to a warrior, its DPS output either at range or in melee just didn't stand up to its more specialised DPS counterparts. The Druid was perhaps the one class which suffered most from being intended as a versatile hybrid, when in truth the game just wasn't fine-tuned for that sort of play in Classic. If you play a Druid and love the class, don't give up hope. They were taken as healers and you will likely get a spot in the raid team, especially when you consider that only one race per faction could play the class. Just don't expect to be casting anything other than Healing Touch for the foreseeable future. Shamans played quite differently to the class you know today. Totems were the crucial mechanic which was at the heart of the class, and each of the 4 elements had a set of totems which provided different functions. You could have one totem from each of the 4 elemental schools, earth, air, fire and water, active at any one time. Like Paladins, this mechanic allowed Shamans to provide a vital support role, particularly with Manatide and Windfury totems, which brought truly game-changing group benefits. Of course, with this power and versatility comes responsibility and a challenge which some players might not find interesting. However, I'm sure there are many Shamans out there who are keen to experience the class back in its much altered original state. Finally, I'll talk about the Paladin. Paladins were an odd class in vanilla, based strongly on Blizzard's ideas from Warcraft 3 and what they thought a Paladin should look and play like as a result. It seems weird from our perspective of capable prot tanks and Ashbringer wielding Retribution Paladins that back in the day the class was useless at everything apart from healing and buffing. Oh, you did become great at both though. Prot tanking simply was not a thing. The mechanics weren't in place, the mana wasn't there, it didn't happen. As for the Ret, Paladin DPS was perhaps more than any other spec a broken disgrace. Imagine buffing yourself with a seal spell, one of several with different effects, then casting Judgment to damage the enemy with the power of the seal. Got that? Yeah, that's Paladin DPS in vanilla. From the beginning to raiding, you can understand why Ret didn't shine, I'm sure. But as a healer, the Paladin was useful, increasingly so throughout the course of the classic game. Like the Shaman, the Paladin could well be described as providing an off-healing role, whilst also buffing the group. Blessings like Wisdom and Might only had 5-minute durations, so regular rebuffing was necessary. On top of this, the Paladin's mana efficiency, something which grew truly apparent in later patches, made it a solid choice for healers. Oh yeah, let's not gloss over the fact that you got to wear one of the best sets of gear WoW has ever produced at a time when most people ran around looking like a bag of jelly beans. I'm talking about tier 2 of course, Judgment. So there you have it. I've given you all the basic information you need to know before choosing what class you want to take into the wide world of vanilla Warcraft. Remember that unlike in the modern game, vanilla isn't a game you can just rush through or re-roll in like now. If you want to get a character to even level 40, it will take a long time, hard work and dedication to the class. You should play whatever you want to play at the end of the day, but hopefully this video has helped make the long-term choice easier for you going forward. Now if you did like the video, let me know in the comment section, and be sure to smash that like button like you were needing on a corrupted Ashbringer. Till next time guys, have a good one, I'll see you later.